Well, thank you for joining us and welcome to Leonard Peikoff's Essays. And this week we shift gears. We're still talking Leonard Peikoff. We're talking one of the great works, one of the great unappreciated works. This book, it is time to get into Keeping It Real. Now, the last time we got together, we presented Leonard Peikoff's talk, Triumphs and Tribulations of a Radio Talk Show Host. And this is great because when Leonard Peikoff talked about his podcast, he mentioned that it was interesting to go from being a radio talk show host, where he ran into a lot of roadblocks getting into philosophy. And he talks about how much he enjoyed doing a podcast and answering questions on philosophy directly. So from 2008 to 2016, Leonard Peikoff produced 419 podcasts, answering between 2,000 and 3,000 questions. Is this outstanding, James Valliant, or what?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and what a service the editor did. He's got a PhD from Harvard University. He was the curator of an important museum in London. So we got a smart guy who went through it and did the editing on this book. And what a wonderful service. You know, as you and I were talking just before our conversation here, you know, people think of the big two books that Dr. Peikoff published, The Ominous Parallels, and then his majestic treatise on objectivism, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. But there's so much more material. His lecture courses, Understanding Objectivism, Objective Communication, Objectivism through Induction, his work on scientific induction. And so, and the dim hypothesis, my God, of course, the third of his great books, but there's so much more. And the lecture series that were reduced to book form are invaluable. But here, a very special service was done, because this isn't the high reaches of philosophy. You know, it's not Peikoff talking about epistemology and metaphysics and, you know, metaethics and historiography as he is with those other books. Here, he's bringing it down to reality. You know, not only does Ayn Rand created this amazing philosophy called objectivism. Not only does objectivism create this remarkable new integration and chewing of the most fundamental philosophic ideas that creates this powerful philosophical system. When you start living it, when you start applying it to your real life, you begin to realize how it actually solves nearly every problem of ordinary life, whether it comes to friendship and romance, or whether it comes to career decisions you might make, or difficult interpersonal matters that might come up. How do we interface with politics? Guess what? Dr. Peikoff has answered these questions, applying objectivism, showing what a powerful technology, what a powerful tool for answering what in many cases were as the then unanswered applications of objectivism to real world problems. And again and again and again and again, we're going to see over the course of these Fridays, and thank goodness it's still Peikoff Fridays, we're going to be discussing just what a powerful tool objectivism is for cutting through to the essential aspects. And so it's learning how to think about philosophy in a very real world, issue by issue way, whether it's politics or art or the most practical issues of personal living. And that's the kind of thing Dr. Peikoff gets into. What do I do if I'm in a romantic relationship, ... What do I do if a coworker, ... What if my boss is ... Every aspect of life, Dr. Peikoff seems to be able to have a magic touch where he gives us not just important answers to those questions, which are thoughtful, but lesson after lesson after lesson in terms of how to make philosophy a real and powerful technology in your life. And for that, we owe Dr. Peikoff and his editor, I think, a great deal.
You know, it's interesting. There's a great talk out there by Alex Epstein. I've got to get that right. I keep going back to Welcome Back, Kotter. Warren Epstein. But no, Alex Epstein, who is going to be talking to Yaron Brook tomorrow. Isn't that going to be fun?
Oh,
but
yeah.
Alex Epstein had a great talk about how to leverage objectivism in order to become a leader in your field. And in this talk, he mentions, you know, when I first got into objectivism, and realized how powerful these ideas were, I figured when I finally started meeting objectivists, they were going to be superhuman. They were going to be the leaders in every field they were in. They were going to be these amazing people who had all the answers. Now, some of us have achieved some degree of that. I think a few of us might have let Alex down, but some of us have been. But nobody more than Leonard Peikoff, and especially in reading this book, has that ability in every just ordinary situations to bring these insights in. And I'm so glad that Barry Wood put this compilation together. And I have to say, and I mentioned this earlier offline, there's a lot of Robert Heinlein fans in Objectivism. Robert Heinlein was an Ayn Rand fan. He named one of his starships the John Galt in one of his early stories.
Well, he mentions Rand and Moon is a harsh mistress.
Yes. And my favorite story by Heinlein might be Stranger in a Strange Land, but I always go back to the book Time Enough for Love.
Yes, yes.
And Time Enough for Love is interesting because it's not so much a novel as it is a series of vignettes. There's an overarching story that ties them together, a kind of framing, which is you've got the oldest man who ever lived. He's been alive for 2,000 years. He's had all these adventures and he's gained all these insights, but he's tired. He's like, he feels old. He's felt old before. And you go through these rejuvenation processes, you feel young again, but he's done. And he goes someplace where he can just pass away. And fortunately or unfortunately, friends and relatives of his and people who know of him track him down, rescue him, get him all the medical treatment to keep him alive, not the full rejuvenation, but just they won't let him die. And they take away what they call the suicide switch in his medical room. They stop him from killing himself, which is really a violation in this time and age. And they make a deal with him. We'll give you the suicide switch and we'll let you do whatever you want if you'll just talk to us and tell us your stories. And whenever you get bored of this, you can push the button and we'll let you do it. But as long as we can keep it interesting to you, we want to hear everything you've got. And so it's an interesting framing for this long novel. And I couldn't help but think of that in going through these 2,000 to 3,000, he had to give an estimate because there's so many thousands of answers to interesting questions. And you think, well, yeah, but then some of them, isn't this minutia, isn't it? But he cut all those out. He didn't answer the questions that he didn't think would be at least of some general interest. And for this series, the podcast series, he explains he also didn't get too much into technical philosophy. Well, I don't know, but that middle ground that he's in is enormous. And I just love that. So I couldn't help but think of the story of Lazarus Long, the Methuselah of the future, who tells all of his stories. And these people have to keep him alive because there's so much wisdom in it. And that's what I get from this.
If there is one man I could give the life of Lazarus Long to, it would be Dr. Leonard Peikoff. He has been the most important teacher that I have personally known in my entire life. I've been blown away by books of people that I haven't met, most importantly Ayn Rand. But in terms of people that I've known and known reasonably well, Dr. Peikoff is by far the greatest influence in my life. I had, as many people know, the great experience in the late 1980s and early 1990s of spending several years studying personally with Dr. Leonard Peikoff at his home in Southern California. At least once a month on Saturday nights, and sometimes much more frequently, we'd recreate the Saturday night salons that Ayn Rand carried on in the 1950s and 60s. And he liked that format of meeting on Saturday nights. At first, we were there reading Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand before it was published, and giving commentary, a diverse group of us, medical doctors, philosophers, professionals in various fields, including myself. I was just a graduate from law school at the time and starting to work as a public prosecutor, but he wanted input from various fields. And I got an opportunity that a lot of people never get, just to ask him questions that were about my personal life, about my career, about issues I was having as a prosecutor or something. And, I've had the experience of just hanging out with him in his backyard or pushing a shopping cart in a supermarket with him. And he is a remarkable man because whatever the question was that I would ask him, he would give the most thoughtful, serious answer he possibly could. And I kind of felt the way he describes his relationship with Ayn Rand. When he first met her, he was young. He asked a philosophical question, and Ayn Rand went off. It's just, here I was, a 17-year-old boy. Obviously, it wasn't me. It was the question that so motivated her, but she wrung out of herself every bit of clarity that she could to make herself perfectly well understood. That's how I felt when I was with Dr. Peikoff. And what these podcasts do is give the world that same experience. His ability to answer questions is itself an important exercise in philosophical thinking. Philosophy is not about these abstract issues utterly disconnected from human life, as so much of contemporary philosophy would insist on it being. No, it is the most powerful force in an individual mind and in the course of human history. And we as objectivists, when we understand that, we take that seriously. That means that there is no significant issue which objectivism does not have a unique take on, a powerful new insight into. And we're going to find that over the course of these Fridays again and again and again. And one of the exciting things about the podcasts is that it did kind of recreate that experience for everyone else to be able to ask, practical, real world questions and experience for themselves firsthand just exactly how Peikoff would approach these issues and use objectivism to give very powerful, practical, real world living advice. It's astonishing.
It really is. Now, the book itself, and we'll go back and forth a bit, I think, between the book and the website, which is still out there. The book focuses on the first 5 years of the podcasts. There will be a select few from those later years that I will hunt out as well, because although the bulk of it was in that initial period, there's a few gems out there. And if I could just give one example, just to get us started. And I do this intentionally because it relates to the ARCUK's Ayn Rand Fiction Club. So let me play this, and my producer will let me know if it doesn't play properly, the technical issues here, but let's give this a shot.
One last one I'm going to sneak in, although our time is up. What would happen in a sequel to Atlas Shrugged? When Galt goes back to the world, does he find a really free society, or are there still remnants of the old one? And the answer to that is, this is a romantic, not a naturalist novel. She is writing fiction to present the essentials of life in the universe and given the nature of man. She is not saying, now, if you go on strike and get this hideout and so on, and you beat down the current government, the next thing will be you'll start the Department of Waterworks and then the Department of whatever. That's ridiculous. Nothing happens after Atlas Shrugged is over. Atlas Shrugged is a theory, is a story. If you want to make another story, which would be a violation of copyright, by the way, another story which picks up with the same characters, that is not the original novel. There is no way to continue fiction and ask, is this really what happened? Nothing really happens after the story is over, unless you're inspired by it and you want to write a novel that doesn't violate the copyright.
Now he goes on at length, but for folks who are members of the Ayn Rand Center UK, and to be a member, go to aynrandcenter.co.uk. We'll put the link in the chat. If you are a member, you have access. We've just started, so you haven't missed anything yet. If you haven't signed on yet, you need to be part of this. Discussing the Fountainhead, it was interesting because there was some speculation, even among some of the kind of experts in the group, about, well, maybe what really happened with Rourke in this conversation with the dean is that the dean was trying to, and at some point it was really speculative. It started sounding almost like fan fiction. And I love that Lisa Van Dam, yes, Lisa Van Dam was there for that first session. Amazing educator and host of her own show here on ARCUK. And she said, I was once told, and I believe this, if you're reading a novel and something is not actually in the novel, if it's not in the narrative, it didn't happen. And I love this because, James, you'll remember we were talking about Leonard Peikoff's short essay reprinted in the early Ayn Rand about Ayn Rand's literary style. And he made the same point. In fact, he said in republishing these unpublished excerpts from The Fountainhead and other stories, he said his attitude on this was these unpublished bits, they're pure fiction. They didn't really happen to Howard Roark.
I love that.
And I love that Leonard Peikoff, yeah. And Leonard makes that same point here in this one question here, which is, it's one thing to speculate and have some fun with a story, but you've really got to separate that stuff out. A novel is what happens in the pages of the novel.
And the thing is, I think it's a psychological phenomenon. If you really love a book, you just don't want it to end. You want to stay in that universe. You want to stay in Ayn Rand or Victor Hugo's or Edmund Rostan's universe, and you never want to leave it. Or Robert Heinlein's universe. There have been times I haven't wanted to leave his, and that's what a really good book can do. And so what we want more. We want to project in our own fantasy more from that fantasy, but we have to understand that's fiction, and it was fiction so constructed as to be complete. A completely organic, integrated, and Ayn Rand in particular as a novelist was, of course, particularly logically integrated with her plot, her character arcs, and so forth. And even her images and paradoxes come to imagematic resolution by the end of all of her novels. She's actually a great poet too, but it's a self-contained universe. But people, especially young people, can take it very, very seriously. And they get to the point where they are quoting John Galt or Francisco d'Anconia or Howard Roark as if they were real people. And we do have to be a bit on guard on that, no matter how powerful Ayn Rand's vision is. Someone was saying the other day how, I love the Ayn Rand's fiction, the villains are right on point, but those heroes are sometimes unrealistic. And I thought to myself, in a way, it's Ayn Rand's heroes that I most connect to, most relate to. I'm certainly not Howard Roark or John Galt. I have the realism to know that I'm not quite that. But on the other hand, it's Dagny Taggart and Hank Rearden, and the Ayn Rand's positive characters all around, Kira Argonova. These are characters that I intensely related to when I was reading the book. So it's a strange psychological phenomenon. But if you do, you'll end up thinking, well, of course, these people have some kind of reality. What would have happened to them? I got to know the answer here.
Yes, and the people who say that our heroes are unrealistic, I want to know, do they read biographies? Right. Have they studied Abraham Lincoln or Winston Churchill or Sergei Rachmaninoff? Or these great people do exist, and they're complex.
They're not. Tell the truth. If you were to just tell the simple truth about John D. Rockefeller, if you were just simply to tell the simple truth, you're right, about some of these extraordinary human beings in history, they wouldn't buy it in fiction. They wouldn't, the life of Benjamin Franklin, say, as an inventor, a scientist, a publisher, a folksy philosopher, a statesman, a diplomat, a man behind the construction of the Constitution. You say no one human could do all that in one lifetime. If you put that in fiction, people would say that's crazy for a person to have accomplished everything, say, that Henry Ford or John Rockefeller, or take Steve Jobs even. It's sort of a superhuman thing. And that's, I think, one of the incredible things about Atlas Shrugged is that Ayn Rand is pointing out how we do not recognize the heroism of creative geniuses or the most productive people in our society. We simply do not recognize the facts about them. We may be getting a little off track here, but Dr. Peikoff will be doing exactly that, showing the reality behind Ayn Rand's ideas. It isn't an unrealistic fantasy that Ayn Rand is projecting, quite the opposite. It's a technology for successful living here on Earth. In fact, that's what Ayn Rand called her philosophy before she named it Objectivism, simply a philosophy for living on Earth.
It's funny because when the book,
you can really see it with Peikoff's, discussion, Keeping It Real, is a great title because that's exactly what it is. It shows the relationship between
the book came out,
philosophy and living.
I wasn't too sure about the title when the book came out. It seemed a little kind of, street language. And then I realized that That's exactly what he is doing. Is he's talking to the average person and answering their questions in a way that the average person can understand, even though these answers come out of these extraordinary ideas and broadest abstractions, but he's answering these great questions. If I could, because we're just starting the series, I'm going to read a bit from the introduction for anybody who hasn't read the book yet. So this is the great editor, Barry Wood, who put this together for us. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, just a bit here. From 2008 to 2016, Leonard Peikoff, Ayn Rand's longtime friend and heir, hosted a weekly podcast at his website, peikoff.com. Incidentally, that it's still out there. I'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. He fielded hundreds of questions, well, we know thousands of questions in total, from listeners about how to apply Ayn Rand's ideas to the concrete issues and problems that confront people in real life. He says, Dr. Peikoff provides a wealth of practical counsel on personal relationships, child rearing, career problems, sex, and many other topics. And throughout, he stresses the importance of maintaining a reality orientation. In other words, of ensuring that the principles we profess do not float in our minds as useless wordplay, but guide us in action toward our personal, selfish happiness here on earth. Keeping it real, get this now, keeping it real also contains many anecdotes and insights pertaining to Ayn Rand herself, making it invaluable for those who find the woman as fascinating as her ideas and want to learn more about her from today's most knowledgeable source. Now that, to me, is irresistible.
Yeah.
Absolutely irresistible. How tempting is that? You know, when more discussions of morality start, or when you go to study morality at a university, they're going to overload you with lifeboat ethics, you know, trolley problems and situations that most of us are never going to face in our lives. They'll give these bizarre, completely hatched, out of context, you know, you have to make this dramatic life and death decision one way or another, right? And in an out of context way, and they'll present that as ethics. As if, you know, this extraordinary thing that you're almost never, ever going to have, that involves a difficult, you know, a choice at the end of the day. That's the essence of ethics. That's the essence of philosophy. The exact opposite is true. The exact opposite is true. Philosophic ideas are there to help us, guide us normatively in our thinking and in our acting, the development of our own souls and characters, so that we can cope with real world problems. What it is it puts flesh on the bones when Ayn Rand says there is no theory-practice dichotomy. Now, I could understand, for example, when I read Ayn Rand's, say, her political theory, I could understand that what she had done is she's actually solved most of the difficult legal and political questions that philosophers had so far, you know, put out there. I could see, wow, she's cutting through these, at least in my little limited context even, I could see how she was cutting through most of these problems. But it's more than that. You can take this to a problem, a real world problem that you've never confronted before, that Ayn Rand herself hadn't considered perhaps before, and still, with the same principles that objectivism gives us, apply them with useful power to our actual daily lives. And as the editor says, everything from romance, sex, and human relationships, all the way to career and everything else. And yeah, I'm one of those who's interested in the life of Ayn Rand. It is
the irony.
Yeah.
I don't know if you would call the irony or the big lie behind philosophy courses teaching us things that have nothing to do with life, is that when they set them up that way, and if you have a rational philosophy, it's not that hard to answer, even when sometimes the answer is there is no answer and you're going to fly by the seat of your pants. But the real hard questions are the everyday questions, the mundane questions. Do I lie to the IRS? Do I lie on my job application? Do I stay in this relationship even when things get difficult? Do I tell the truth to my children about Santa Claus? The little things, the big things are actually the hard questions, and the ones we actually would do well to be served by somebody with that kind of wisdom to help us get through.
These are the questions that more of us will need guidance on for most of our life. No, you're absolutely right. In fact, there were times when Dr. Peikoff would elicit hard problem, borderline questions from us when we were doing those Saturday evening seminars. He would say, give me a difficult problem. And time after time after time, of course, the correct answer was achievable, even in those difficult problems. But the issue there, as he would constantly remind us, is, well, how often are you really going to come up with this problem? How is this going to come up in your ordinary life? And it shows all by itself how philosophy is completely off track, and how philosophy over the last 100 years has sort of self-declared its own bankruptcy. It declares that it has nothing to do with the real issues of life. And that's the sad, pathetic state philosophy is in. Dr. Peikoff does exactly the opposite. He shows the powerful, ongoing relevance of objectivism and what a powerful tool it is to answer new questions that come up that you may never have anticipated that objectivism could answer.
Now, an interesting thing about a book like this, too, I have to say, when it first came out, I didn't buy it right away, and I didn't read it right away. And part of that is because there's just so much in it, but it's not a progression. Whereas when Dr. Peikoff was doing the podcasts, every week I was on it, every time a new one came out. And it's interesting how that works. If there's an old television show that you never watched and now you can watch it, you either binge watch it or you don't watch it one at a week over time. And sometimes we used to have what they called appointment TV, appointment television. Every Thursday night, I'm going to be watching, MASH or whatever the thing is. And I'm hoping that these Peikoff Friday sessions, as we go through some of this book, will give people that sense of, well, it's a big book. I don't know if I just want to dive in. I want a little bit at a time, and I want to go through it with folks. And I hope we can give people that. Now, I'll read the very first one in the book to give you an idea. If you're coming at the book like I did, with kind of a sense of, thought I lost my audio for a second there. If you're coming through it with kind of a sense that, I don't know, where would I start? Or, do I really want to get into it? I don't have a purpose in mind. I went into the book, and it's funny, there's an old woo bit of wisdom that says, well, take any book, open a random page, and you will find the answer you're looking. It doesn't matter what the book is. It could be the dictionary. It could be the Bible. It could be anything. But I'll tell you what, I go into this book, which I know has 1,000 great answers to 1,000 different questions. The first chapter, and I'll give a chapter list in a minute. The first chapter is work and career. And here's the question Dr. Peikoff which he answered on this particular podcast. The question was, I am a student. If I become a fiction writer, won't I have to surrender the possibility of ever being number one in my field? That is, won't I have to acknowledge the fact that Atlas Shrugged is the pinnacle of literary achievement? I don't think I could accept a career where number two is the best that I could do. And Leonard Peikoff, I'll read the answer and then we can talk about what he does here. He says, no, this is a huge mistake because you're judging your work by a comparative standard. You're taking someone else's work and saying, is mine better or not? That is a complete error. If you are in a creative field, and all work is creative, and you love the work, your work is worth doing. It has a value in and of itself. Your standard should not be, is it the best? It should not be, is it better than someone else's? But is it good? Is it a value? Have I achieved something rational, something creative, something that is worth doing and advances my life? And if it does it advance human life as such? The relation of your achievement to other work is irrelevant. This is Leonard Peikoff now. I'll take myself as an example. I think that some of my books, at least, and some articles and courses have been of value. If I had started out by saying, I'm going to write the dim hypothesis or OPAR, but my standard is going to be, is it better than Ayn Rand? Or is it better than Aristotle? I would have been utterly paralyzed. It would have been inconceivable. I'd have to be a schizophrenic to answer yes. Realistically, I'm on a lower level, and that is simply it. I'm not the genius of the ages. I would argue with him about that, but Leonard writes,
Yeah,
I'm not the genius of the ages, but still, I believe I have made points, organized things, and created something that on its own terms is a great value. That should be all that concerns you as a creator. To repeat, the one key thing is to remember here, do not aim to be better. Look at the work and aim to be good. Now, this is Leonard Peikoff's answer, and he's answering off the cuff. And I know that Barry Wood edited this, but you can tell he did minimal editing. You know, this is not what he would have written if he was going to sit down and write an essay. And yet it's perfect. It's the perfect answer.
Yeah.
And it hit me because I have that sense of, I want to be a podcaster and a writer. And then I listen to some of the great podcasts that are out there already. And I'll be like, oh man, I'm never going to be a Debbie Millman. I'm never going to be Tim Ferriss. Should I even bother? And I look at, writers of the kind of books I want to write on empowerment and presence and life as an end in itself. And then, I read Viable Values or Loving Life. And I think, well, I want to say something a little different there, but they've kind of already done something better than I'm going to do. And Leonard gives the answer. It's not about, is there something out there better than what I want to do? I have something I need to do, something I want to do, something that I know will be of value. Yeah, there's going to be better writers out there.
And it's going to be unique to you.
And it's going to be unique to
which
me.
is important.
But objectively, it'll be of value. And just, it's just funny to open the book with that sense of, yeah, is this going to hit with me, or is it just going to be random stuff? And yet all of the random stuff is rich with wisdom.
Exactly. Now, there's a whole essay I could give about that, about various principles of objectivism that are coming into play there, right? Because there are a variety of, for example, intrinsicism versus subjectivism, right? As the epistemological root of that kind of error in one's thinking, or the critical issue of self-esteem. For example, there are a bunch of issues that you could bring up there. And, as Ayn Rand always said, it's not the question of the level of your intelligence. It's a question of whether you're using your intelligence to the best of your ability. So there's a lot of principles that are behind that tip of the iceberg on that particular answer. But the question is, he can bring it all to bear. And what you get the feeling of is, what a powerful, it is both powerfully principled and moral, and it is powerfully practical and life enhancing. And you're going to see that again and again and again, how there you could back up, look at it from the 10,000 meter perspective and see, wow, what an integration this is with a bunch of objectivist ideas being applied. Or you can look at it from the other way around. Wow, this is that each particular thing is itself just a part of a wider integration. It is absolutely astonishing. And what it does is, by the end of, I hope, these discussions, we'll have a sense of training our own minds in terms of dealing with new issues that come up. Always be unanticipated questions in life come up. We can't predict the future. But the question is, how do we train our minds in terms of thinking in terms of philosophy and applying that to our real life? So by the time this is done, our minds will have done enormous calisthenics in terms of preparing the kind of muscles you need cognitively and evaluatively to answer questions that come up in your life and that may come up for which you haven't anticipated coming up or have the ready answer to yet.
One of the great things I mentioned, reading biographies, one of the great things about reading the words of wise people, it makes you wiser. And that's another benefit of a book like this, is I read this stuff and I think, I just got smarter.
Yeah, you feel your IQ going up as you read. This has always been the case with me and Dr. Leonard Peikoff. Listening to him lecture or reading his work, I just feel like I've got a much broader and better, first a concretely firmer grip on the issue, but also a better integration of my ideas each and every time. And I am willing to wager that if you check us out every Friday. You will have that growing experience each Friday that, wow, yeah, this is a powerful technology for living. Promise.
Well, now speaking of training your mind, I do recall Leonard Peikoff talking about, he wasn't to, in his own head, to not go out into the world and look at other broadcasters and radio hosts, and say, this person is really good at what they do. For instance, he would often praise Dr. Laura Schlesinger, if I can say that right, Dr. Laura, for her ability to just quickly like focus in on a caller would say one sentence and then she would immediately have an answer for that, and now the answer may have been wrong. Her assumptions.
Well, she had a conservative religious kind of morality, but it provided her ready answers to most questions. Right. If a caller called in, boy, she had the moral answer right there. And what he really appreciated was that clarity and that moral clarity, which is so rare these days, even though in substance, we disagree with a good deal of what Dr. Laura said.
But I think, Dr. Peikoff going into becoming a radio host, being a radio host, if people are calling in and you're trying to field their questions, you really have to trust your own almost immediate response about answering those questions. And so I think that definitely is good on Dr. Peikoff for trusting his own mind and and being confident in himself enough to give those answers so quickly, and to realize that that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to field those questions rapidly, succinctly, and coherently and helpfully enough for people to really take in. That's a real achievement.
It really is. And that's why I use the word wisdom above and beyond knowledge. Real quick, let me call out, because we have in the super chat, Mary Aline is helping out the ARCUK. Thank you so much for that. Bonnie as well is in the super chat as well. And finally, Jonathan Honig is on board with superstar contribution there. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Anybody wants to ask us a question, of course, you can ask it in the chat. We may or may not catch it, but if you put it in the super chat, a couple dollars goes to support the ARCUK.
And then we can look it up in the book and give you the answer.
That's right. That's right. In relation to that first Q&A that I mentioned, incidentally, Christopher Smith says, there were guitar players who saw Eddie Van Halen and quit. And he's like, no, Eddie wouldn't want that. Bring yourself out and be inspired by greatness, not overwhelmed by it. And I appreciate hearing that from Christopher Smith, because he is a guitar player, and he's the kind of guitar player that makes me want to throw away my guitars. And then I remember, oh yeah, that's not the point.
Right. Well, as a kid, one of the things that inspired me to be a trial lawyer was watching, say, Perry Mason on television. I used to love that show. And Perry Mason, I think, lost one case in his entire life and was always devastating. He was better than that. He could always get the true perpetrator at the back of the courtroom and say, okay, I'm guilty, you got me. So he always had this ability to just cut through and get the real perp to stand. Now, that never once happened to me in my 18 years as a prosecutor, where at the end of a prelim, the true perp stands up in the back and says, oh, you got me. It never happens. And so if I were to have used Perry Mason as some kind of a standard, he was a hero, an inspiration, a model. The idea that he was a greater trial lawyer than I could ever possibly hope to be did not discourage me. Quite the opposite. I wanted to do justice. And so it was what I was inspired by was, and why it was inspiring rather than discouraging, to see a trial attorney who I knew was an artistic stylization of something that I could probably be never as good at. But it was the inspiration of his dedication to the work, to his dedication to justice as a value, to his dedication to the truth, and how he used his intelligence, how he used reason to get to that. Now, that's what I found inspiring. And I knew that at my own level and in my own way, I could do that. And time again, Dr. Leonard Peikoff is going to give us answers like that. Again, shattering the theory-practice dichotomy, that intrinsicist subjectivist dichotomy, and showing us how abstract principles are the most practical things in the world.
Yes. And I love your example because, people say truth is stranger than fiction. And some people answer back, oh, truth is messier than fiction. And I would say truth is more complex than fiction, because in fiction you focus on the essentials, but it's precisely fiction, it's precisely art, it's precisely abstractions that help us make truth, the real world, the messy world, the complex world, understandable. And that ability to do that is what makes this work so amazing. Watching Leonard Peikoff untangle even a short and simple question, but with 10 assumptions in it that need to be sorted out.
Exactly. He's going to take apart, and this is you're going to see some key things here. He's going to take apart popular package deals that people have in their head and separate out the issues correctly. Or he's going to provide for the first time a principle in a way that you'd never imagined that would answer the question. And it's going to happen time, and I'm going to remind us as this happens, time and time again as we go through these. In effect, he's implying over and over and over again the answer to some theory practice dichotomy that people had in their heads, maybe because they were trained religiously to think about morality, intrinsicism. That makes the principles utterly impractical, unlivable if your principles are like that. And on the other hand, the necessity for principles and for there being reality-based, integrated principles. And we're going to see that again and again and again. In what are largely short answers. I mean, some of them are longer, some of them are quite short indeed. But no matter what the length, Dr. Peikoff, if you unpack his answer, is providing us an amazing case-by-case study of how to think in principle, how to think philosophically, and apply that to problems as they come up in life, as I say, that we may never have anticipated.
So we are going to be going through a lot of these questions. We'll do several every week, and depending on how long they are, we may do more than a few on any given Friday. But if you're in the chat or if you're listening to this afterward, let us know if there is a question that you found especially intriguing or compelling, or a question you've got that you would like us to look up to see if Leonard Peikoff had an answer. And finally, if there are any questions where maybe you disagreed with Dr. Peikoff's answer or just didn't understand it, because we would love to talk about those. The book is divided into 9 sections: work and career, love and sex, parenting and children, Ayn Rand's novels, human nature, religion, Ayn Rand, maybe my favorite section, objectivism and objectivists. That's going to hit home for all of us. And then the past and the future, which I think is the most political part of the book.
Yeah, I want to mention real quick is that you can go to Amazon and you can look up the book, Keeping It Real, Leonard Peikoff, bringing ideas down to earth.
Yep.
And
all the reviews are 5 stars. I think there's 1 4-star review.
Well, now there's 10 reviews that are written, and then there's 32 ratings, and he's got 4.9 out of 5. Not so bad, right? And but I mean, all of these that are written are 5 stars, and you can kind of see what people are really appreciative of. Everybody is writing glowing reviews of it,
but with content. These aren't just, oh yeah, he's great.
Yes.
Yeah, good stuff on Amazon. If you don't have a copy of the book, it is still available on Amazon.com, and the podcasts are still available, and we'll be using some audio excerpts as we talk too.
The podcasts are available online, and they can be found, but it might be a good idea to get the book. It's available at Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, both in hard and paperback editions, as well as audio version, if that's better for you. And it might be a good idea, if you're interested in this content, to get a copy of the book somehow.
And it's a great party game. We've talked about when Great Lakes Objectivists gets together, we have a game we call Random Atlas, and we'll do this with the Fountainhead too. But you pick a page at random, call out a number, read the page, and then see who can be the first person to guess what's the context. Well, that's the game part of it, but the real fun part is just pick a random page, and Ayn Rand's writing is so rich and so full of insights that you don't even have to know the whole context for it to be just sometimes wonderful, sometimes infuriating, sometimes heartbreaking. And this book is a perfect candidate for that. You can pick any page and you think, well, I'm not going to be that interested in whatever and it turns out that because he's approaching this from abstractions right down to the nitty-gritty of the dirt, it applies to so many things above and beyond the questions.
Yeah, now Harry Binswanger's the Ayn Rand lexicon is a great one for that. Randomly pick the page, describe what the term is, see if anybody can guess what the entry is. It's fun.
Those kind of games really are fun, and they're good in terms of keeping frosty on objectivist terminology, which is of course a whole, we generally use the English language as it's given, but there are a few terms where we have a very definite understanding and meaning for it. And those kind of exercises, I think, are very healthy in showing the extent and power of our unique take on certain concepts. Absolutely. And you're going to see that here again and again. Once more, that's one of the things you're going to see again and again as we go through this. I'm very excited to be part of it, because it's a part of these discussions, because it really is a way of practically bringing down to earth and reality abstractions that I'm discussing on our one of the perks of being a member of Ayn Rand Center UK. You can participate in our Sunday discussions of Leonard Peikoff lecture courses and books. We're just started the Ominous Parallels, for example. But that is very often a very abstract philosophical discussion or a historical discussion. With these on Friday, what we're going to see is the power of objectivism. And I would just add one more request even to Robert's. None of us here are Leonard Peikoff. None of us here have quite that. And I have to agree with you, Robert. Leonard Peikoff downplays his own unique talents here. He really is a genius. There can be little doubt in my mind how much he has shaped my own thinking. I think would tell you, I agree, he is an absolute genius. But despite the fact that none of us are Leonard Peikoff, if there's some new application, if there's some new headline, if there's not some new personal issue that comes up with you, ask the question, at least in the abstract. And we may not be able, if it's related to the podcast here, we may not be able to give an answer like Leonard Peikoff's, and it sure isn't going to be official objectivist answer by any means. But on the other hand, maybe we can chew using objectivist principles, using the ideas that Dr. Peikoff uses to answer these issues, to sort it out for ourselves. So feel free to bring your own questions. As I say, none of us are Dr. Leonard Peikoff. On the other hand, this is a giant exercise in the application of objectivism. I think it would be helpful if it be closely related to the question that Dr. Peikoff is asking here, but do bring your own questions. And maybe we can have a discussion. If we can't resolve it, we can maybe have a discussion about it afterwards. So please do come. I want to encourage participation, and an active participation with things that are on your mind as well.
Yeah, I see in the chat that there are some people who do not have this book and who are not aware this book existed.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, you can get this, I believe, on Kindle and in paperback as well. Yeah, please go ahead and do that. And also, don't be shy about going onto Amazon and putting in a review. There's only 10 written reviews in there, and there should probably definitely be more.
That is, when you consider Dr. Peikoff's other works, this work doesn't have a lot of Amazon reviews comparatively. Yeah, you've got me thinking maybe I should do an Amazon review now of it, because unlike the Ominous Parallels or OPAR or the Dim Hypothesis or even the Logical Leap, this has a comparatively fewer number of Amazon reviews.
Yeah, and I have to say, Dr. Peikoff, or one of his questioners, actually anticipated the Intro to Ars Thursday show. We do a show called Life on Earth, and I always say at the beginning of the show that if objectivism really is a philosophy for living on Earth, if it is the owner's manual to of a human life, then it stands to reason that objectivists should be among the happiest, most successful, the most gracious people on Earth. I go on and on. And yet,
Ayn Rand and Johnny Carson said, "I'm chronically happy." The normal state for an objectivist should be chronic happiness.
Well, Leonard Peikoff's actually asked about that well before I ever said anything, and he gives an answer at length that I think we're gonna cover in an episode. But somebody actually asks him, "Is it true to say that objectivists should generally be happier and should live longer than other people because they hold rational values and life as the standard?" Now, I'm not going to give his answer right now,
right.
but that is one of the kinds of questions that I'm really looking forward to reading his answer and then discussing that with you, James Valliant. There is also a whole section on Ayn Rand, as I mentioned, that we're going to get into as well, because Leonard Peikoff said he wished he'd had more questions about Ayn Rand because these questions helped him bring up his memories and get it all out there.
Right. I cannot imagine two better hosts for this program than you two, because you do focus on the real life on earth, as you call your show, aspects of philosophy. And so for this particular series that we're doing, you guys are the ideal host for this. So I'm very appreciative that you've joined me and that you're going to be a part of this, because you are the ideal people for doing this. When I think of certain things, I think of, Lisa Van Dam and Shoshana, who's taught the Fountainhead at university level, at least sometimes participating in the Fountainhead discussion group. I can't think of anyone better than they for that. Or I can't think of anyone better than, say, Harry Binswanger or Greg Salmieri doing the serious philosophy stuff, or Don Watkins, who could be a better communicator on communication. Well, the Nasirs, and I've had the privilege of at least knowing them somewhat for years now, they are the perfect people for this, because they bring the perspective of living life on Earth in a principled way to it.
Well,
and
you're very kind.
Very kind, James.
And I can't think of anybody better to talk to about Leonard Peikoff, both the man and the ideas. I don't know anybody who has a better, James, the ideas are obviously rich inside of you, because you don't give those kind of floating answers that some of us sometimes do. I can tell that you love this man, you love these ideas, and you know this stuff inside and out better than just about anybody I know. So this is going to be a great series. I'm especially looking forward to it. It's interesting because Leonard Peikoff did this until he was 83 years old. And he wrapped it up in that same year. You can find the video on YouTube. He's in a jazz trio. What do you mean he's in a jazz trio? He's playing piano at Ocon as part of the Andrew Lewis trio. That is still out there. It's a half hour, 45 minutes of him at the piano with a trio. At one point, they bring a singer up, so they have a quartet. I am so looking forward to getting even deeper into this material.
Leonard Peikoff is one of the most remarkable humans I have ever met. It's hard to put flesh onto that, but when I would go to his home, I would first be emotionally blown away simply by the art, the sculptures, the paintings, and the memorabilia that he had in his home, not to mention his exquisite taste in various other things. First, there's that. Or the way he enjoys and loves music, or the way he'll just love, and he'll say, oh, okay, I'm no Chopin, I'm no concert pianist, but he would just love to play piano. Or just to have a discussion about literature, just to have a discussion about life. He was an extraordinary human being, is an extraordinary human being that way, and was an extraordinary person to interact with for years on that level. And this, more than any of his other works, this book that has been put together gives you a feel for that aspect of Dr. Leonard Peikoff. What a rich, amazing, complex soul he really had. On so many fronts, apart from also being the most important teacher and mentor I've ever known in my life. So yeah, I love him. He is a hero of mine. He is my teacher in a way. And I've had some outstanding teachers in my life at university, at law school, even in high school. I had some brilliant, brilliant teachers, not to mention other objectivists who are brilliant teachers. But I have to say, Dr. Leonard Peikoff is the greatest teacher I've ever known. And of all the people I've ever known personally, the one who's had the most profound impact on my thinking. There's no question about it.
Outstanding. Well, thank you to everybody in the chat. Thank you to everybody listening live. If you're listening to this later, thank you to you too. This is going to be a great series. We've been having fun with the Ford Hall Forum lectures. We've been having fun with the essays. Of course, James, you've been doing this for months. We just came on board a couple months ago, but this series, this is going to be great fun. I am looking forward with Amy to pulling out some of the great ones. We are going to talk about them. We're going to apply them to life. We will all be richer for it afterward. Thank you, everybody. We're looking forward to having you join us every Friday.
Take care.
Huzzah.